Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to leadership, crisis management, business continuity, disasters, resilience, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am the only Alex Fullick there, so I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you fantastic guests like today. Many of you will know that I love to read, and I read all sorts of things for education purposes, entertainment, and just basic knowledge. Anything I can get my hands on, I love to read. And I came across a book that I thought would be of great benefit to all of the viewers and listeners, because we talk a lot about leadership in our industry and the new ways of doing things. And I thought this would make for a great topic. And I'd like to welcome to the show the author of Leader as Healer, Mr. Nicholas Janni. Nicholas, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alex. It's a real pleasure to be here.
And congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. There's some great points and comments you have in here. We're going to talk about a few of them today. But before we get to that, now I know I've got your biography and we've chatted a little bit back and forth on email. Could you take a minute or two and tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you got into what you do?
Right. Okay. Very brief headlines. So what I do, Alex, is I work with CEOs, senior leaders, partly one-to-one, but mainly in group work. And I do that in different countries. I do it online. I teach at the IMD Business School in Switzerland, world #1 business school. And I take people on a very experiential journey. And that's really the core of my work, because I believe we get stuck a lot of the time in narrative. So our minds are constantly creating narrative. And so my work it's like crossing a bridge from narrative to experience. And I put narrative out here because it's often disconnected from my actual experience. So that's the simplest way of putting it. And at the same time, that's a very, very big bridge to cross. But when we cross that bridge, everything changes. So that's basically what I do. It's taken me the best part of 45 years to be able to do what I do. I started in the theatre, actually, because I was brought up in a show business family. My father was a famous film producer. So not wanting to follow the father, I went into theatre and spent 20 years in theatre. Actually, I would say exploring theatre as a spiritual path, in the sense of what were the highest states that the actor could go into. A little bit like in sports, everyone speaks about the zone. Mm-hmm. So how was that for the actor? What was it like when the actor would really open and their whole mind, body, heart system would go online, and they'd be like kind of on fire, even if it was very quiet. But it's just an extraordinary level of intensity, presence, emotionality. So I devoted 20 years to studying that and to really studying the pathways that made that more consistent, because every performer knows it. Actually, every person has moments of that. But in the arts world, you want to be able to do that more regularly. So that was my career path until a small group of us started working with executives. And that happened at the end of the 90s. And that's a whole story in itself. But there was a gradual transition from the theatre to executive development, such that in 2001, a small group of us left the theatre and created what then became a very well-known consultancy called Olivier Mythodrama, which I left about 5 years ago to really pursue 100% my own work. That's the headlines.
And that led to Leader as Healer.
Yes. Yeah. So for many years, the core of my work, and still is, was what I would call presence, but real presence, not some kind of charisma.
Mm-hmm.
Real presence, meaning I'm really here. I'm really here, and I'm really available on all levels. And Leader as Healer was a phrase that, as these things do, kind of dropped in about 4 years ago. Oh, what's that? So I started listening. I mentioned it to a couple of CEO clients, half expecting them to say, no, come on. And they were like, yes, yes, yes. So everyone I spoke to about it had a huge yes. And one of my biggest supporters is a man called Michael Watkins, who wrote The First 90 Days. It's a kind of Bible in the business world. And he said, Nicholas, write a book, write a book. So I struggled and I wrote, and as you kindly said, you have the book. So it's been very well received. I think it's very timely. I think 5 years ago, a book with the title would have been easily, cast aside. But there is something about the title now that just has huge resonance because we're in a broken time.
Yeah.
We are in a time of arguably collapse. And if ever healing was more needed in the broadest sense of the word, this is the time, I believe.
It's true. With COVID has turned so many different aspects about things that we kind of took for granted or that we were so entrenched in and didn't know we were so entrenched in, and turned all those things on its head.
Exactly.
Right. And we're, I think we're in many industries, regardless of what you do, I think we're in our uncharted territories.
I absolutely.
We can't do the same things we used to do. We have to do them differently and seeing things differently. And it's changed as an individual. It's changed my perspectives on my priorities and what I want to accomplish and how I do it. And I think that's happening everywhere. And you pointed out CEOs as well.
I 100% agree. I have CEOs saying to me, literally verbatim, I cannot do strategy the way I used to. I'm in a new territory.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's what the book is also. It's fundamentally about the fact that we got hugely over-dominated by thinking. That's my core message. And I love what Einstein asked when he asked, is thinking your master or your servant? And in 95% of the leaders I meet, and I meet leaders from every culture, thinking has become the master. And it's totally different when we do the inner work, where we relocate ourselves, this is how I phrase it, experientially into a much deeper inner location within which I have a very sophisticated thinking capacity. And I also have a lot of the rest of me online. I mean, I typically start working. I was at the IMT a while back and I was talking with a professor there and I said to her, I normally start by saying to everyone, you don't seem to realize you're operating with only about 50% of your full capacity. And she said to me, Nicholas, it's only 20%. Okay, right. Maybe I need to be bolder. So that's my key message. And we've normalized that, Alex. That's the huge problem. And when you normalize something, you don't realize. I think you alluded it to in what you said a moment ago. We got used to working in a certain way. So we don't realize that that is much smaller than it could be.
Mm-hmm.
We need to wake up. We need wake up. That's why my work is so experiential. We have to feel something different. And then we're like, oh, okay, I think I get it. I get it. It's a bit like, we walk around with our shoulders up here around our like this, and then we have an
Mhm.
amazing massage and our shoulders go like that. Well, it's only in that moment that you think, oh, I'm walking around like that, and I didn't realize
Yeah,
because it
that's
was
true.
normal. It's actually as simple as that in a way, except that the waking up becomes a complex process, but the essence is that.
Well, and on that note, I want to jump into the book because, as I mentioned before we started recording, there's a quote I wanted to get your opinion on and what you
Great.
meant by this. I know we have our agenda and we were going to talk about a few things, but the more I read this quote, the more I wanted to ask you about it. So I'm going to start here,
Please.
and if you can explain, what you meant by this, because I really like this quote here. This is a path of restoration through which we reintegrate previously exiled aspects of our nature, physical, emotional, and transpersonal. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Hmm. Thank you, Alex. That's a great starting point. So, the way I see things is that we have got used to, starting with our school education, we get used to what I call a narrow bandwidth. And it's the way I function and it's the way I perceive the world. And in that narrow bandwidth, our linear thinking mind has predominance. And other parts of us have more or less gone offline or into exile. For instance, when we were children, we were intensely physical. So we felt life moment to moment in our body. We felt the world. We sensed the world. Indigenous cultures have an extraordinary relationship with the world through the body. We exiled that as we got narrower and narrower. Most people, most adults are walking around in what I would call a disembodied function. They don't really feel their body. Even if you go to the gym, you see people doing things to their body. That's not the same as, I feel my body, I'm here. So, and I think we know that because you see how many people are drawn to yoga, Tai Chi, to different kinds of body work, Qigong, all of that.
Mhm.
We've exiled a lot of our emotional life. We had to, and this is a big part of my work, what's now called trauma-informed leadership. Every single person I meet, myself included, we had to close down a lot of our emotions as we were growing up because they were not well received, they were not welcome. So we put them in exile. And in organizational life, that's a huge issue because I'm operating with a whole part of my life energy offline. And it means I can't really feel empathy or compassion. I can't really feel you because relationship means I feel you. I don't just hear your words. So that's the body, that's the emotions. The transpersonal, this in a way is the deepest part, Alex, because when we are operating primarily in our thinking mind, first of all, we need to realize that our thinking mind does not experience anything. I cannot experience the world through my thinking. So not only do I not have my body and my emotions online, I don't have this deeper, spacious sense of something much bigger than the world here. This is what every tradition has guided us to. Every tradition, East, West, through meditation practice, through prayer practice. This is not about belief. This is about an experience of life in a much more, what physics now calls a unitive field. An experience of much less separation. This is more difficult to speak about because it's by its nature fundamentally empty. but it's not an emptiness of depression. It's an emptiness actually of enormous kind of numinosity in a way, where I walk into nature and I stop my unconscious, oh, that's beautiful, that's a tree, that's this, and I'm in a deeper silence. That's what I mean by the transpersonal, a much deeper silence. And again, I think the whole uptake of mindfulness worldwide is an unconscious attempt to reconnect with that. It's just that it stops short in a lot of cases, because the purpose of mindfulness is not to be less stressed. I mean, that's how it's used. And of course, it has that effect, but it's actually to open our consciousness much more deeply. And, you know, everyone touches this. I don't meet anyone, hardly anyone, who, when they understand what I'm talking about, has not had experiences where they suddenly feel more one with everything, where time slows down. Almost everyone has moments of that. Mm-hmm. So that's the transpersonal as well. But we've come to live in such a way that those are exceptional experiences. I believe that's partly why we're in such a crisis. Those are so exceptional, so far out of the norm. I think it should be that that's actually more the norm. Imagine how it would be if we lived in a world where we were, as normality, connected. As normality, we felt connected to everything. And occasionally we got disconnected. That would be a very different world. I personally believe we're on that edge. I think that's where humanity is. We're on that edge. We're like at the end of this disconnected way of living. And it's getting very, you know, the symptoms of that are getting worse and worse. And most probably they're going to get worse, unfortunately.
And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to reach out to you about this, because when we talk in my industry with disasters and crises and resilience, I've been saying for not a long time, but a little while now, that, you know, those are all great and you can manage all that stuff, but it's got to start with you.
Right.
And, you know, if you're not aware of your surroundings and what's going on and what people are saying and doing and why they're doing this,
yes,
then how are you going to get on this path of resilience?
Right. I couldn't agree more. And it just comes to me to say this, let me give one definition of resilience and see if you relate to it. We have to shift from, I find my identity from the outside, to actually my identity is not dependent on the outside, because the outside is getting more and more chaotic. If I'm looking for a stability inside me based on the outside, I'm going to be lost.
Yes.
That's a very fundamental change in a human being, developmental change.
I am so glad you said that, because at a conference in November in London, believe it or not, I said, you know, resilience, to me, and maybe it's my growing, is self-awareness. It's got to start with me before I can project that or pursue it somewhere else or with others or within my organization, anything. I've got to change first. Exactly. If I don't change, there's no way I can create something that looks different, because then, as you said earlier, there's a disconnection.
Yes.
So when I'm trying to get my organization resilient and all the operations, you know, interconnected and things like that, but I'm not connected to it. Right. You know, I'm not connected to myself. So how can I create that?
We ignore the shaky ground and try and build everything on very shaky ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. That made me happy, and I agree with you 100%. And I'm so glad. You know, that means I'm on the right path if I'm starting to think like that. So that makes me feel good as a person. So thank you for that. So you also talk about 2 models of leadership in your book.
Yeah.
The first being executor, and the other being healer.
Yeah.
What's the difference between the two? What's an executor? What's a healer?
I would say they're literally two completely different ways of leading. The first is the one we've got used to, and it is doing, 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 fixing, fixing, thinking, thinking, thinking. It's the everything I said about the narrow bandwidth.
Mm.
And of course, it's had a lot of success up to a certain point, but it is not in any way fit for purpose anymore. Because as we all know, as the world gets more and more complex and volatile and unpredictable and unexpected, that way of working that way of thinking and being is just not inadequate anymore. Because our thinking and our doing always wants to make everything predictable, and it wants to reduce everything to the understandable and the known. That's a very limited way of functioning. That's leader as executor as well. It's also power in a more dominant, more abusive way often. It's like wielding a sword, but with not a lot of finesse. So leader as healer is a totally different paradigm and a totally different interior, because leader as healer is someone who has worked to bring parts of them back online, parts of themselves, who has a much deeper coherence. So leader as executor will have very little coherence in the sense of they may speak, but you will feel, yeah, but that's not actually what you're feeling inside. There's a disconnect between words, action, and the interior. And that sows fragmentation. So leader as healer is a leader who is fundamentally more coherent inside, and therefore creates teams and cultures that are fundamentally more coherent, and uses not so much a sword but a scalpel. And like any good surgeon, a good surgeon takes things out but creating minimum damage. So that's also leader as healer. Leader as healer has a way bigger bandwidth, a way bigger capacity to relate, uses thinking, intuition, feeling, sensing, and above all, you might say, is comfortable with being in unknowing. This is, I think, a essential capacity now for leaders. Can a leader hold a team to be in, let's not fix this too quickly because we'll just fix it in the ways we already know? Can we actually sit and tolerate unknowing? Can we admit we feel anxious and stop trying to fix it and actually stay with that? Because in my experience, time and time again, when groups do that, a much higher level of thinking awakens. That's when we have real insights, real innovation, real deeper understanding, which is never what we would expect. So I love your preparing for the unexpected, because real insights are not things we expect. They're like, oh, the idea came to me, as we love to say. Yeah.
Mm.
And it's not an idea I had before. And I think we need that more and more. We need senior teams, we need organizations to be able to hold themselves in unknowing and listening, and until a higher level of thinking emerges, which it always does when we stop trying to fix too quickly.
And believe it or not, on that note, we've come to the end of our first segment. We're talking today with Nicholas Janni, the author of Leader as Healer. Join us for segment 2. We're having a great inspirational talk here, and I'm really enjoying this. So we'll be right back. If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.